It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Hello, I am Shane Nelson, and this is Discovering America. For our Gettysburg special, we will talk about the Battle of Gettysburg in all of its entirety. Here's our show. After winning the Battle of Chancellorsville in the spring of 1863, Lee's army decided on a second invasion of the North. The plan was to disrupt northern operations, help take the burden off besieged Vicksburg, put pressure on Baltimore, Washington, Philadelphia, and strengthen peace movements. Another goal was more military, frankly, defeat the Army of the Potomac, and perhaps start peace talks. Yet as soon as the movement began, critical decisions were made that would lead up to Lee's first major defeat at Gettysburg. The first was Lee's choice to send the feared cavalry of General Jeb Stuart out too far from his advancing army. The second was when General Hooker of the Army of the Potomac offered his resignation. Lincoln agreed fully and put a capable General Meade in command. After a while, Lee's army was in Pennsylvania, shadowed by the Army of the Potomac. The tension was rising and a large battle was imminent. The place would be decided when a large group of Confederates entered the town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, looking for shoes. There, Union cavalry under the command of a tough West Point graduate, General John Buford, held off the Confederates until more help arrived. Oddly enough, the Confederates came from the north while the Union came from the south. General Buford is credited with saving the Battle of Gettysburg by making it happen, for he held off the Confederates and realized the great strategic importance of the high ground around him. Despite General Buford's quick thinking, the lines began to crumble under the onslaught of a much larger Confederate force. So, by the end of July 1st, the Union retreated to the hills south of town and took up defensive positions. The Confederates stayed back a bit and began planning for the day after. In his typical way, Lee told one of his generals, General Ewell, to take Cemetery Hill if it be practicable. It was Ewell's decision. Well, Ewell didn't think that Cemetery Hill was practicable to take. This mistake turned the tide of the war. For the next day, Cemetery Hill would prove to be a major basis for Union defense. Yet by this time, night was closing in, and both of the armies began massing. Lee's army was 72,000 strong, while Meade's army had some 93,921 men in its ranks. By the morning of the second day, both armies were almost completely engaged at the battle. The Union line was in a fishhook formation, with Little Round Top on the extreme left and Culps Hill as the curve to the right flank. During the night, Lee had thought up his plan for the day. His star general, General Longstreet, was to hit the Union left flank hard. Yet Lee's intelligence was negligible, because Cavalry General Jeb Stuart was gone. So when Longstreet's attacking army thought they were hitting the very left flank of the Union line, they were actually hitting the very center of the flank, causing them to be caught in a vicious crossfire. Yet the men defending the right flank were not so fortunate as their fellow right flankers. A Union officer, Major General Daniel Sickles, commander of the 3rd Corps, moved his men from the southern edge of Cemetery Ridge to along Emmitsburg Road, which was slightly higher ground, yet it left a salient in the Union lines. On top of that, Sickles didn't have enough men to cover the high ground correctly, and his corps was smashed with awful losses to both sides. Yet some people believe that Sickles' direct violation of Meade's orders saved the battle by surprising Longstreet's attacking forces. James McPherson wrote,
Sickles' unwise move may have unwittingly foiled Lee's hopes.
And John Keegan said,
Sickles' decision resulted in blunting the whole Confederate offensive that was intended to cause the collapse of the Union line.
The argument rages on. While the battle is raging all along the Union line, the extreme Union left, although missed by Longstreet's attack, was still being advanced upon. The most vital objective of the vicious attack was Little Round Top, the end of the Union line. The hill, if captured, would allow Confederate artillery to pound the Union soldiers from the side. Realizing this, Meade's chief engineer, Brigadier General Governor K. Warren, sent Colonel Vincent Strong's brigade of 4 regiments, an artillery battery, and the 140th New York Regiment to garrison Little Round Top. Just as Strong's men arrived, the brigades of Brigadier General Vander Law started to attack the hill. These included the 4th, 15th, and 47th Alabama Regiments and the 4th and 5th Texas Regiments. The 20th Maine of Strong's brigade were the most vital defenders of the hill, for if they were overrun, the hill was as good as taken. When the Confederates were driven back time and again by the hill defenders, they changed tactics and began to swing around to the back. Seeing this, Chamberlain, the commanding officer of the 20th Maine, ordered his men to spread out into a single file line, then swing back, forming a refuse line in the shape of the letter V. They then held off 2 subsequent charges up the hill, but then there, on Little Round Top, with ammo virtually out, Colonel Joshua L. Chamberlain initiated a bayonet charge with the left wing of his V defense, and the 20th Maine finally beat back the attacking regiments of Law's brigade. Soon after, Law's brigade withdrew forever. Although there is some speculation that another man, named Holman S. Melcher, initiated the charge, most historians believe that Chamberlain was the focal point of it. In Chamberlain's report of the day, he writes, "At the crisis, I ordered the bayonet. The word was enough." Chamberlain has said in speeches since that Melcher wanted to move the center forward to rescue some wounded men, but Chamberlain replied that he was just about to order the whole regiment forward. At about the same time Little Round Top was being attacked, the troops of Confederate General Joseph Johnston were assaulting Culps Hill. The hill was thinly defended because most of the manpower had been devoted to defending against Longstreet's advancing divisions in the Union center. Yet the small brigade of New York soldiers were in defensive works. These defensive works were ordered built the night before by Brigadier General George S. Greene. They barely prevented a total breach of the lines, yet, at the end of the day, the Union lines were still intact. The Confederate generals were stunned, and Union victory was still a possibility. The real slaughter was yet to come. By the morning of July 3rd, 1863, Lee had his plan for what was to become the last day of battle. It was roughly based upon the plan for the previous day. Yet before it was underway, Union artillery began pounding Confederate positions near Culps Hill, and a large engagement for control of the hill followed. Lee had to wait until 11 to make his move, and by then the situation necessitated the changing of Confederate plans. Longstreet would command General Picketts' Virginia Division and 6 brigades from Hill's Corps and a direct attack on the Union center. Around 1 p.m., all of the soldiers were organized, and about 160 Confederate guns participated in an enormous 2-hour bombardment of the Union positions. The one problem was, they overshot their targets due to slower fuses, and the Union lines were unfazed. Around 3 p.m., the din died down, and some 12,500 soldiers of the Confederate Army started to march across the battlefield. Picketts Charge was beginning. As the Confederates approached, the Union artillery on and around Little Round Top and Cemetery Ridge started hammering the easy targets from the side. Despite heavy losses, the Confederates kept marching. Then, at the fateful 450 yards, the Union unleashed its artillery with a weapon not unlike a giant shotgun. Canister shot. Men were ripped to pieces and obliterated. The losses were horrendous. Yet, even with the huge number of dead or wounded, the Confederates moved on and reached rifle range before being cut down by a huge volley from Union soldiers. Even after such carnage, the Confederates reached the Union lines. In all but one place, they were thrown back. In that one place where the Confederates broke through, they only met fresh reinforcements and were decimated. That place where the Union line was temporarily broken is now known as the high water mark of the Confederacy, representing the closest the South ever came to winning the Civil War.